Soryong is an award-winning investigative journalist working in one of the biggest media companies in Korea. One night, her team division receives a desperate call from a crying mother who reveals that her son had been unjustly killed by a pastor who was secretly running a drug ring and using his gullible members as test rats. The next day, Soryong accompanies her team and the desperate mother to confront the pastor and investigate the situation. But the pastor threatens them with a rifle, and his wife even fires a shot to blow up the dead boy's ashes. He also calls the cops on them and tells them to leave. As he tries to walk back into his gate, Soryong stops him and forces a flower vase into his pocket. This makes him angry, so he points a gun at her, threatening to kill her. But Soryong doesn't give up. The next day, she shows up in a parachute with her colleague, Han-do, to infiltrate the pastor's residence. Upon crashing down, she discovers a hole in a window and sneaks in to find a room filled with drug plants. There, she finds a mentally deranged boy guarding the plant room. Seeing the wounds on his body and the lock on his neck, she asks who did it to him. He happily reveals that it was done by the pastor's wife. When she inquires about the other captives, he points her in the direction. So she immediately instructs Han-do to call the cops and wait for her while she goes to rescue the captives. As she searches around the compound, she comes across a small tunnel that leads to a hall where she sees the pastor's wife being worshipped like a god by the gullible followers. Shocked, she pulls out her phone to record it, but mistakenly trips on the floor, causing them to notice her. Upon seeing her, the pastor's wife fires a bullet at her, but she dodges it and runs for the exit with the recording. She manages to throw it to her teammates outside before getting dragged away by the deranged followers. The pastor's wife catches up to her and pulls out a rifle to shoot her, but at this moment, the cops arrive. Seeing this, the teammate outside immediately removes the memory card from the recording device and hides it deep in his pants to avoid it getting confiscated by the cops. At the police station, Soryong tells an officer that the pastor is running an opium drug production factory while using the followers as unpaid workers. Upon hearing this, the police officer reveals that the pastor and his wife are connected to powerful people, so arresting them without strong evidence would be problematic. Soryong shows him the video recording and promises that as soon as her media company airs the news, the pastor and his wife will be powerless in the face of public criticism. The officer agrees to her plan, so she returns to her office and spends the night with her team to come up with an episode for broadcast. After broadcasting the news on air, the pastor and his wife are immediately arrested and taken to jail. Soon after the success of this case, Soryong goes to interview a man whose son, a famous K-pop idol, mysteriously went missing 20 years ago without a trace. At the same time, the idol's girlfriend traveled to the US and hasn't returned ever since. Soryong reveals she'll take on the case and track down the runaway girlfriend in order to solve the mysterious case and give him justice. One night, she suddenly receives a text from the runaway girlfriend requesting a meetup. So, she shows up to work despite the protest from her supervisor to drop the case since other journalists who were investigating the case had suddenly gone missing. Meanwhile, Han-do is alone in the interrogation room with the runaway girlfriend, whose name is Hae-won. She tries to flirt with him, but he acts awkward around her. So she grabs his phone and calls her number with it. Soryong interrupts their little moment, and as soon as they settle down on their seats, she begins to question Hae-won about the famous idol who mysteriously went missing 20 years ago. It turns out that Hae-won was his girlfriend, and was also the last person to see him alive. Soryong recounts the incident from 20 years ago. The famous idol was attending a movie premiere when his girlfriend, Hae-won, called. He quickly left the venue to meet her at home. but that was the last time anyone ever saw him alive. Haewon, the girlfriend, suddenly traveled to the US without a trace, leaving his case to run cold. After recounting this, Haewon confesses that on her way to his house 20 years ago, she had met another woman with burgundy nail color walking out of his house. She immediately confronted him for cheating on her and angrily left. After revealing this detail to Soryong, she leaves the office, claiming innocence about the famous idol's death. As soon as she leaves, Giho, a co-worker, inquires about their meeting with her, but Han-do is curious about her. So Giho explains that 20 years ago, the famous idol had been dating Haewon, whose father is one of the richest men in the country. That day, while driving home, Soryong reveals that she doesn't believe Haewon's testimony. She points out that since the girlfriend had immediately traveled to the US, it meant she was guilty of something. Elsewhere, a woman, while swimming, notices a mysterious figure staring at her from a corner, causing her to suffer flashbacks from a traumatic event. As she walks over to her car at the parking lot, she realizes that her tire has been slashed, triggering more trauma. So, from that day on, she begins to act distracted while at the school where she teaches. She even gets startled when a coworker approaches her for a conversation. She begins to find mysterious letters in her drawer, causing her to ignore a coworker when he tries to talk to her. That evening, she reports the letters to the cops, who immediately decode them as a death threat letter. She reveals that she suspects her ex as the suspect, but the cops think it's impossible since her ex was already in jail. That night, as she returns home, a strange man suddenly shows up behind her, causing her to run away in panic. She stumbles on her feet and drops all her belongings, but doesn't stop to pick them up. As the man steps over the belongings, he notices a ring box and stops to pick it up. The woman, whose name is Gaeon, seeks help from Soryong. So, Soryong inquires about her case from a coworker, who gives her a flash drive containing the truth and begs for her help on the case. That night, Soryong assembles her teammates to watch the video from the flash drive together. The video turns out to be a recording from a wedding celebration. As the happy couple exchange rings and are about to share a kiss, a strange man suddenly pulls up to the venue and opens fire at the guests. Gaeon's newly wedded husband dies while shielding her from the bullet. The guests escape from the venue, leaving Gaeon alone with the strange man, who turns out to be her psychopathic ex. He forces her to sit next to him as he plays the piano. While this happens, the cops storm in to arrest him. After watching the horrendous footage, Soryong and her teammates review the psychopath's details and discover he's from an influential family and was only sentenced to 30 years in prison. Meanwhile, outside the media building, a strange man lurks around while looking at his tracking app. The next day, at the school where Gaeon teaches, a male teacher notices her empty desk and asks a colleague of her whereabouts. So the colleague tells him about the recent strange letters that Gaeon had been receiving. That same day, Gaeon shares her fears with a female journalist at the media company. She reveals that after the traumatic incident from 10 years ago, when her ex stormed her wedding, she had made up her mind to never open up her heart to a man, but she eventually fell in love with another man who was willing to marry her. So she suspects that her ex must have heard about it from prison and was seeking revenge like he did 10 years ago. The female journalist assures her that the ex couldn't escape prison, but that same day, Gaeon receives shocking news that the ex has actually been released from jail. Soryong investigates and discovers that his sentence was suspended after being diagnosed with multiple personality disorder, which forced the prison to transfer him to a psychiatric institution. That day, as she leaves work, the male teacher from Gaeon's school stops her to inquire about Gaeon's well-being. It turns out he's her boyfriend whom she plans on marrying. After learning of the EX's release from prison, Soryong tries to pry for info on the name of the psychiatric hospital where he stays, but the cops refuse to provide information, claiming that the ex is being held captive in an institution, making it impossible for him to haunt the girl. That evening, as Soryong contemplates her next move, she receives a call from a strange number, which turns out to be from the psycho ex. He requests to meet her for a conversation, so she pays a visit to the psychiatric hospital to interrogate him. Upon meeting her, he claims to be suffering from multiple personality disorder and even shows her an official medical report to back up his claims. He reveals that he no longer remembers Gaeon's face and that he wants nothing to do with her. But Soryong doesn't believe this. That day, she goes to confront the doctor who issued the medical report and accuses him of giving a fake report. She exposed that he had been immediately promoted to the director of the hospital after issuing the diagnoses, and that the ex's father had donated about 6 billion won to the hospital. After getting exposed, the doctor runs away without denying any of the accusations. Seeing his reaction, Soryong makes up her mind to expose the truth in order to transfer the ex back to the prison, where he rightfully belongs. That night, as she works on the ex case, he suddenly calls to reveal that he has a fan who's close to Gaeon. Upon hearing this, she begins to suspect that Gaeon's new boyfriend, who also works as a teacher, might be the fan who is helping the ex. She recalls that he had met her at the company to check up on Gaeon, which was weird since he wasn't supposed to know that the girl was taking refuge at the company. So, the next day, she meets up with the new boyfriend and asks how he knew that Gaeon was at the company. He hesitates to respond, and at this moment, a call interrupts the conversation, so she pauses the conversation to pick up the call. The scene then shifts to Soryong attending a meeting with her teammates. They make a call to a foreign doctor who reveals that multiple personality disorder is a mental illness that requires diagnosis from multiple psychiatric doctors. Hearing this, Soryong confirms her suspicion that the Korean doctor had faked the diagnosis in order to release the ex from prison. To gather evidence, she visits the ex again and lies to him that Gaeon had married her new boyfriend that evening. She shows him a flower from the wedding ceremony to see his reaction, but he stays surprisingly calm and reveals that Gaeon's new boyfriend is actually his fan and accomplice. He pulls out a ring, claiming that it was given to him by the new boyfriend. As Soryong takes the ring for a closer look, he suddenly flares up, asking her to return the ring. When she refuses, he suddenly switches personality to a teary man, asking her to give back the ring. But Soryong sees through his acting and reveals that when people with multiple personality disorder switch between personalities, they lose all memories of their previous personality, which means he was faking the disorder. Now exposed, he drops the act and commends her for being smart, but she ignores him and pulls out a camera from the flower bouquet. It turns out she had been recording their conversation. He immediately gets violent and destroys the camera, but she reveals that the file has already been stored in the cloud, which renders his efforts useless. Soryong then recalls a flashback to the day she was questioning the new boyfriend. He confessed that a fellow teacher at the school had told him that Gaeon had taken refuge at the company, which was why he paid a visit to check on her. The truth is then revealed. It turns out that the ex's fan and accomplice was a female teacher who teaches at Gaeon's school. When Gaeon started working as a teacher, she found out about the girl's past with the psychopathic EX and became a fan of him. She also emailed him to provide him with constant information about Gaeon. That day, the police visit the school to arrest the female teacher for aiding the psycho ex. Soryong also visits Gaeon at the school to inform her that the ex would be sent back to jail. Meanwhile, as Handol closes from work, he receives a call from Haewon, the famous idol's girlfriend. but he ends the call to avoid talking to her. She had been calling him frequently as a way to flirt with him. As he tries to cross the busy road, he's shocked to see her standing on the opposite side. So, left with no choice, he accepts her invitation for a date. During the date, he points out that her testimony the last time was fabricated. She had told them that on her way to meet the famous idol, who was her ex, she had met a woman with burgundy nail color. Han-do points out that since it was a little dark in the hallway, there's no way she was able to see the woman's nail color. Hearing this, she admits that she had lied, and that she was actually behind the death and disappearance of the famous idol. She also confesses that her sudden return from the US was because her father had stopped sending allowances to her, which was weird. Meanwhile, Soryong interrogates her manager, who had been working on the idol's case 20 years ago, and he reveals that the president of their media company had also been working on the case. But when they found an important evidence, the president ran off with it and prevented them from finding the truth about the disappearance of the idol. After learning this, she teams up with her manager to meet a producer who had also been working on the idol's case 20 years ago. The producer reveals that there was a witness who saw how the idol was killed. Since the witness was the idol's dog, no one took it seriously, but he had met a psychic who knew how to communicate with animals. He gives the psychic's contact to Soryong. The next day, Soryong orders Han-do to go with Giho to visit the female psychic. Upon meeting her, she recalls the incident and tells them that after communicating with the idol's dog, it told her that the idol had been beheaded by someone. The dog also pointed her to the picture of the person who killed the idol. Han-do shows her a picture of Haewon and asks if it's the same person, but since it has been over 20 years, she fails to remember. That evening, Soryong receives approval from a marketing company to air an AI composite sketch of the famous idol. As soon as it airs, it immediately draws the public's attention, making them remember the idol who mysteriously vanished 20 years ago. Soryong sends the link to the video to Haewon and asks them to meet. This makes Haewon anxious, so she severs and beheads a sculpture she had been molding. So, that night, Haewon angrily storms into Hanju's building, which is her father's company, and steals a head sculpture that had been carved 20 years ago. Meanwhile, Soryong meets up with a friend who works at Hanju's company and asks him for some news, so he tells her a rumor that had been flying around with people claiming that the chairman of Hanju was dead, but his son is covering it up for an unknown reason. He also tells her about the stolen head sculpture, so she suspects that Haewon had beheaded the famous idol and then made it into a sculpture with his skull. The next day, Soryong goes together with Han-do to meet a tech guy who recovers some data from the idol's father's old phone. The tech guy reveals that he had found the name of a detective on the old phone. Han-do is shocked to hear the name of the detective since it turns out to be his father. So, that day, he goes to meet his older brother, who tells him that they died when a car smashed into him. The brother also recalls that on the day of the father's funeral, only 4 of the father's co-workers attended. One of them had asked him if he had found anything in his father's car, but he lied to them, saying he hadn't found anything. In reality, he had found an envelope in the father's car, but hid it from the co-workers. Upon hearing this, Han-do returns to his family's house to search for the envelope. Inside the envelope, he finds some documents. The next day, he calls Soryong and the idol's father to meet up in the cemetery, where his dad was buried. The idol's father immediately remembers his dad as the detective who tried to uncover the truth, but suddenly stopped contacting him. At this point, Han-do shows them the documents he had found at his house, which reveal that the famous idol's headless body had actually been found in his bathroom, but the other detectives were bribed off to burn and destroy the body. Everyone involved was bribed off, so the case ended up becoming a mystery. After learning about this, Soryong receives a call from her tech guy, who reveals that the sculpture, which was stolen, was a 98% match with the face of the dead idol, which means Haewon had used his skull to mold the sculpture. Learning this, Soryong and Han-do immediately drive over to Haewon's sculpture workshop, but they are shocked to find the place on fire with Haewon trapped inside. Soryong runs to save her, but the workshop explodes, killing her. At the cremation house, Haewon's brother comes to inspect her body and acts disgusted while looking at it. After confirming that his sister was dead, he leaves with a sad face. But while at home, he breaks down in laughter at the death of his sister and makes fun of her while sitting next to his father, who was lying comatose on the bed. He happily celebrates the death of his sister and rejoices at the thought of talking over the company. Meanwhile, the president of the media company accuses Soryong of carrying out an unlawful interview, which led Haewon to commit suicide by burning her workshop. He cancels the airing of her TV episode and forces her to attend a press conference to apologize for her wrong action. On the day of the press conference, she bows deeply to the journalists and apologizes. Suddenly, she throws away her script and plays a recording of the day that Haewon had met her to reveal that her brother and the media company were trying to silence her. Seeing this, the president demotes her. After a few days, a flower delivery comes to the office and claims that Haewon had scheduled a flower delivery to Soryong days before she died. So, that night, the team gathers together to brainstorm. Han-do suggests they break the flower pot to find any hidden note. As soon as he breaks the pot, they find a unique device in it. Soryong immediately sets up a case board and assigns everyone to a task. She instructs Han-do to research where Haewon's brother lives in order to give them a good chance of finding the head sculpture. The next day, Soryong receives a call from her tech guy, who reveals that the device is a proximity-based tracker and that it's linked to a counterpart. If she gets closer to its counterpart, the two will beep together, setting off an alarm. Upon hearing this, Soryong realizes that Haewon had given her the tracker so that she could locate something important. Meanwhile, Han researches all villas owned by Haewon's brother and discovers one of them that has a huge lake nearby. Soryong finds the location suspicious, so the next day, she goes to survey the area to see if the tracker beeps. But there, she sees a huge truck transporting something to the villa. The next day, she departs with her team and takes a drone with her. They attach the tracker to the drone and fly it over the lake. As soon as it flies over the middle of the lake, it begins to beep, indicating that its counterpart is underwater. Seeing this, Soryong immediately pulls out a scuba diving tank she had prepared beforehand and dives into the lake, even though the tank had only 10 minutes of oxygen supply. As she dives deep into the lake, she finds the counterpart tracker attached to the head of the missing sculpture. As she pulls the sculpture and turns behind, she's shocked to see tons of human skeletons all around. So, she quickly videos the skeletons before emerging from the lake with the head sculpture. With the video evidence, they deduce that Haewon's brother trafficked underage girls for pleasure services. And once the girls serve their purpose, he kills and disposes of their bodies in the lake. They immediately alert the police, who send divers into the lake to pull out the hundreds of skeletons. As soon as this news is released, Haewon's brother is arrested. Seeing how the tides have changed, the president of the media company calls Soryong and gives her a flash drive containing a confession from Haewon, which he had hidden 20 years ago. He tells her to air it in order to whitewash his name in the media. Soryong finally goes on air and exposes the mystery behind the famous idol who disappeared 20 years ago. She plays the video of Haewon confessing to her crime and how she had transformed the idol's skull into a sculpture. Soryong also exposes the secrets behind the bodies found in the lake. thereby putting an end to a decade-long mystery.